Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes.
Yeah.
Today we're diving deep into
Okay.
Adrian Goldsworthy's Caesar, Life of a Colossus. We'll be taking a close look at Caesar's journey from his early days all the way to his dramatic assassination.
Yeah.
You know, it's one thing to know the bullet points of Caesar's life,
Sure.
but this deep dive will really help you understand the man behind the legend.
That's precisely what makes this book so fascinating. Goldsworthy goes beyond just recounting Caesar's military victories and political maneuvering. He paints a vivid picture of the man himself, his ambitions, his contradictions, his brilliance, and his flaws.
So to give our listeners a roadmap, can you briefly lay out the main themes we'll be exploring today?
Absolutely. First, we'll delve into the social and political landscape of the late Roman Republic, that cauldron of ambition and rivalry that shaped Caesar's rise. We'll trace his path from an aristocratic upbringing, navigating a turbulent political scene, honing his skills as a military leader and orator, all the way to his dramatic conquest of Gaul.
And that's just the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Because then we get into the Civil War,
Right.
his entanglement with Cleopatra, and his
Right.
ultimate consolidation of power as dictator of Rome.
Exactly. And throughout it all, we'll be examining the complexities of Caesar's character, his ruthlessness alongside his clemency, his political maneuvering alongside his military genius. Goldsworthy leaves us pondering. Was Caesar a visionary leader who sought to reform a broken republic, or a power-hungry tyrant who ultimately destroyed it?
Okay, let's unpack this. Goldsworthy starts by immersing us in the world of the late Roman Republic. It sounds like a pretty cutthroat environment. What were some of the defining features of Roman public life that would have shaped Caesar's early years?
One of the most important concepts to grasp is auctoritas,
Okay.
a kind of moral authority and prestige that senators constantly competed for. It wasn't just about holding office. It was about the weight your words carried, the respect you commanded, the influence you wielded.
So it was like a never-ending popularity contest, but with real-world consequences.
Precisely. And this competition was fueled by Rome's constant expansion. Warfare provided opportunities for ambitious men to gain glory, wealth, and ultimately more auctoritas.
The book emphasizes the role of allies, too. It wasn't just about Roman legions marching across the map. These alliances, these networks of power, seem to have been crucial to success.
Absolutely. Roman generals relied heavily on allied troops and resources, promising them a share of the spoils in return. It was a complex web of relationships and obligations, and navigating it skillfully was essential for political survival.
And within this system, there was always this underlying tension, this fear of one person becoming too dominant. The book mentions the story of Tiberius Gracchus and his attempts at land reform, which triggered this deep-seated fear of monarchy.
Yes. That story is so important because it highlights the delicate balance of power in the Roman Republic. Even well-intentioned reforms could be perceived as a threat to the established order, a step towards tyranny.
So we've got this backdrop of intense competition, fueled by war and expansion, with the specter of monarchy haunting every ambitious move. Now let's zoom in on Caesar himself.
Okay.
What can you tell us about his upbringing and how it might have shaped his ambition?
Well, Caesar was born into an aristocratic family, the Julii, who claimed descent from Venus herself. However, they weren't one of the most prominent or wealthiest families at the time.
His mother, Aurelia, seems to have been a significant figure in his life. Goldsworthy describes her as embodying the Roman ideal of motherhood.
Exactly. She was known for her strength, dignity, and unwavering loyalty to her family. Goldsworthy suggests that she instilled in Caesar a strong sense of duty and ambition.
But what about his education? It sounds like it was much more than just memorizing facts and figures.
Roman education for young aristocrats was geared towards preparing them for public life. Rhetoric, literature, history, law. These were the tools you needed to excel in the forum and on the battlefield. And Caesar, as Goldsworthy points out, wasn't just passively absorbing knowledge. He was already writing poetry and even a tragedy in his youth.
Wow, so he wasn't content with just reading the classics.
Mm.
He wanted to create his own. There's a quote in the book that really struck me, where Goldsworthy says, Caesar was determined to leave a mark to ensure that his name would be remembered.
That quote really captures his driving ambition from a young age.
Wow.
And remember, he had excellent teachers. Goldsworthy mentions his tutor, Marcus Antonius Nifo, a freed slave who was highly respected for his teaching.
It's interesting to see how Caesar, even in his early years, was exposed to diverse perspectives and influences. This wasn't just about rote learning. He was surrounded by intellectual discussion and debate.
Absolutely. and this education would prove crucial as he navigated the turbulent political landscape of his time. Which brings us to the dictatorship of Sulla, a period of immense upheaval and violence that would have a profound impact on Caesar's life.
This is where things get really intense. Sulla's rise to power, his bloody purges, the proscriptions. It was a dangerous time to be alive, especially if you were on the wrong side of the political divide.
And unfortunately for Caesar, his family connections to Marius, Sulla's rival, made him a target. He was ordered to divorce his wife, Cornelia, daughter of one of Marius's key allies.
His refusal to do so was incredibly brave, even reckless. He could have easily been killed.
It's a testament to his courage and his loyalty to Cornelia. He chose to defy Sulla, ultimately having to flee Rome and live as a fugitive for a time.
That experience must have been a harsh lesson in the realities of Roman politics. He saw firsthand how quickly fortunes could change, how brutal the game could be.
It likely shaped his understanding of power and the importance of having loyal allies. Goldsworthy suggests that this period of exile also gave Caesar time to reflect, to hone his skills as a military leader and orator, preparing himself for the challenges to come.
And speaking of challenges, there's that scandalous episode with King Nicomedes that Goldsworthy mentions.
Ah, yes. The rumors of a homosexual relationship between Caesar and the Bithynian king. Whether true or not, the story played into Roman anxieties about Eastern decadence and was used by Caesar's enemies to undermine his reputation.
It's fascinating how, even back then, personal scandals could be weaponized for political gain.
Absolutely. It highlights the importance of public image in Roman society, something that Caesar himself would become a master of manipulating.
So we have a picture emerging of young Caesar, ambitious, courageous, marked by early challenges and scandals. And all of this sets the stage for his eventual rise to prominence, his quest for the consulship, the highest office in the Roman Republic.
Right, and that's where we'll pick up in part 2 of our deep dive. We'll explore Caesar's strategic brilliance, his financial maneuvering, and his carefully cultivated network of patrons and allies.
Stay tuned, because Caesar's story is about to get even more captivating.
Yes. Welcome back to our deep dive into the life of Julius Caesar. Last time we left off with a young Caesar, shaped by challenges and scandals, ready to make his mark on the Roman world.
That's right. He's got his sights set on the consulship, the ultimate prize in Roman politics. But as Goldsworthy lays out, it's not going to be an easy climb. The competition is fierce, and Caesar has to play the game masterfully to come out on top.
And he does.
Yeah.
One thing that really stands out in this part of the book is Caesar's strategic use of debt to finance his political ambitions. He was borrowing heavily, primarily from Crassus, one of the wealthiest men in Rome.
It seems incredibly risky, almost reckless. Was this a common practice back then?
Patronage and debt were key elements of the Roman political system.
I see.
Ambitious men like Caesar relied on wealthy backers to fund their campaigns, their games, their public works, all those things designed to win over the people and increase their popularity.
So it wasn't just about having good ideas. It was about having the financial muscle to back them up.
Exactly. And Caesar was willing to go deep into debt to achieve his goals.
Wow.
It was a gamble, but one that ultimately paid off.
The book also touches on his personal life during this period. His affair with Servilia, mother of Brutus, is particularly intriguing.
This relationship reveals a lot about Caesar's character. It raises questions. Was it purely a love affair, or was there a strategic element to it? Was he trying to gain influence through Servilia's connections?
I remember reading about how Cato, one of Caesar's political rivals, suspected that Servilia was leaking information to Caesar, even during sensitive Senate debates.
That's right. And those suspicions only fueled the animosity between Caesar and his opponents. It all adds to the drama and intrigue of Roman politics at the time.
So we see Caesar navigating this complex web of debt, patronage, and personal relationships.
Yeah.
But he's not just a politician. He also proves himself as a military leader.
Right.
Goldsworthy recounts that incredible episode
Yeah.
where Caesar was captured by pirates.
That story is just wild. A young Caesar captured and held for ransom, but instead of being fearful or submissive, he basically takes charge of the situation.
Oh.
He jokes with the pirates, demands a higher ransom,
Wow.
and even threatens to have them crucified once he's freed.
And he actually follows through on that threat, doesn't he?
He does. After the ransom is paid and he's released, Caesar raises a fleet, hunts down the pirates, and has them crucified. It's a powerful early example of his boldness, his ruthlessness, and his determination to keep his word.
It's a side of Caesar that we'll see again and again throughout his career. But it's also contrasted with his famous clemency, his willingness to pardon his enemies.
That's one of the great paradoxes of Caesar's character.
Yeah.
He could be incredibly brutal and unforgiving, but he also understood the power of mercy and forgiveness.
Yeah.
Goldsworthy suggests that his clemency wasn't just about being a nice guy, it was a calculated political strategy.
How so?
By pardoning his enemies, particularly Roman citizens, Caesar was showing his magnanimity, winning over hearts and minds, and undermining the opposition. It was a way of consolidating his power without resorting to constant bloodshed.
It's a brilliant strategy, really. It turns potential enemies into grateful allies.
Exactly, and this ability to combine ruthlessness with clemency would serve Caesar well throughout his career, especially during the Civil War.
Speaking of which, let's shift our focus to Caesar's time in Gaul. This is where his military genius truly shines, and where he lays the foundation for his ultimate rise to power.
The Gallic Wars were a turning point in Caesar's life. Here, he had the opportunity to command armies, hone his strategic skills, and achieve glory on a grand scale. Goldsworthy describes how Caesar, despite facing fierce resistance from Gallic tribes, managed to conquer vast territories, securing Rome's northern frontier and amassing immense wealth and prestige.
The book provides fascinating details about the Roman army during this period. It wasn't just about brute force, there was a lot of strategy and logistical planning involved.
Absolutely. The Roman legions were incredibly well-organized and disciplined fighting forces. Goldsworthy describes their training, their equipment, their tactics, all the elements that made them such formidable opponents. He even mentions the debated use of segmented armor by Roman soldiers, which would have offered greater flexibility and protection in battle.
The Gallic Wars were also brutal. Goldsworthy doesn't shy away from describing the violence and destruction inflicted by Caesar's armies.
It's important to acknowledge that aspect.
Yeah.
The Roman conquest of Gaul involved massacres, enslavement, and the destruction of entire settlements.
Wow.
Goldsworthy highlights this dark side of Roman imperialism, forcing us to confront the human cost of Caesar's victories.
And yet, amidst all this brutality, we also see glimpses of Caesar's humanity, his adaptability, his political skills. The book recounts an amusing anecdote about Caesar being served asparagus dressed in myrrh, a Gallic delicacy that he found revolting.
It's a small detail, but it reveals a lot about Caesar. Instead of rejecting the dish outright and insulting his hosts, he pretends to enjoy it, showing his willingness to adapt to local customs and win over people through diplomacy.
He understood that conquering hearts and minds was just as important as conquering territory.
Precisely. And this ability to combine military prowess with political savvy would prove crucial as Caesar navigated the treacherous waters of Roman politics.
And speaking of treacherous waters,
Yeah.
let's talk about the breakdown of the first triumvirate, the alliance between Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus that had brought a period of relative stability to Rome. Goldsworthy meticulously lays out the events that led to the inevitable clash between Caesar and Pompey.
The first triumvirate was always an uneasy alliance,
Yeah.
a balancing act between three ambitious and powerful men.
Right.
As Crassus died in battle, the delicate equilibrium was shattered, leaving Caesar and Pompey as rivals for supreme power.
The book really captures the tension and drama of this period. Both Caesar and Pompey had their supporters, their legions, their claims to legitimacy. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine the fate of the Roman Republic.
And that confrontation, of course, culminated in Caesar's fateful decision to cross the Rubicon, a small river that marked the boundary between his province of Gaul and Italy. It was an act of defiance, a declaration of war, a moment that irrevocably changed the course of history.
It's an incredibly dramatic moment.
Yeah.
Goldsworthy describes how Caesar, standing on the banks of the Rubicon, hesitated for a moment, weighing the consequences of his actions, and then uttering the famous phrase, alia iacta est, the die is cast.
Right.
He led his legions across the river, setting in motion the events that would lead to civil war.
It's a moment that captures the essence of Caesar's character, his boldness, his decisiveness, his willingness to risk everything to achieve his goals. And with that, our deep dive plunges into the heart of the Roman Civil War, a conflict that would test Caesar's leadership, his military skills, and his very survival.
Stay tuned as we delve into the dramatic events of the Civil War, Caesar's entanglement with Cleopatra, and his ultimate rise to become the undisputed master of Rome. Welcome back to our deep dive into the life of Julius Caesar. We've followed his journey from ambitious youth to conquering general, And last we left off, he'd crossed the Rubicon,
Right.
throwing the Roman Republic into civil war.
Crossing the Rubicon was a turning point, but Caesar still had to win the war.
Right.
What's fascinating here is how his strategy went beyond just military victories.
Uh-huh.
Goldsworthy emphasizes how Caesar used propaganda and carefully crafted his public image to present himself as the legitimate leader, the restorer of order, rather than a power-hungry usurper.
So he's fighting a war on multiple fronts on the battlefield against Pompey's forces and in the hearts and minds of the Roman people.
Exactly. And this is where his famous clemency comes into play again. Goldsworthy argues that Caesar's pardoning of defeated enemies, especially Roman citizens, was a deliberate act to minimize bloodshed, win over potential supporters, and portray himself as merciful in contrast to the brutality of previous civil wars.
This makes me think of that famous line from the book where Goldsworthy describes Caesar as a master of war and peace.
Oh, yeah.
He wasn't just a brilliant general, but also a shrewd politician, understanding the subtle levers of power.
Precisely. And this combination of military might and political acumen would prove crucial in the aftermath of the Civil War.
Okay.
After defeating Pompey at the Battle of Pharsalus, Caesar pursued him to Egypt, only to find himself entangled in a whole new power struggle.
And this is where we meet Cleopatra, right?
Yeah.
Goldsworthy really brings this historical encounter to life.
Yeah.
Highlighting not just the political maneuvering, but also the personal dynamics between these two fascinating figures.
Their relationship was a complex mix of political calculation and genuine affection. Cleopatra, a brilliant and ambitious ruler in her own right, saw in Caesar an opportunity to secure her position on the Egyptian throne. Caesar, in turn, was drawn to her intelligence, her charm, and perhaps, as Goldsworthy suggests, her shared ambition.
Their affair produced a son, Caesarion, adding another layer of complexity to their relationship. It's interesting to think about how this might have played into Caesar's image back in Rome.
It certainly fueled the rumors and anxieties about his growing power and his potential ambitions to establish a dynasty. Remember, the fear of monarchy was deeply ingrained in the Roman psyche, and Caesar's relationship with Cleopatra, a foreign queen, only served to heighten those fears.
So Caesar emerges victorious from the Civil War. He's entangled with Cleopatra, and he eventually returns to Rome, not as a conquering hero,
Right.
but as a dictator, tasked with the immense challenge of rebuilding a shattered republic.
And this is where the book really gets into the nitty-gritty of Caesar's reforms. Goldsworthy details the whirlwind of activity. Land distributions for veterans, restructuring of the Senate, expansion of Roman citizenship, even the creation of a new calendar. It's a period of intense change, with Caesar seeking to address pressing problems while also consolidating his own power.
It makes me think of another quote from the book where Goldsworthy says, "Caesar was a man of action, impatient with delay, driven by a relentless energy to reshape the world around him."
That quote perfectly encapsulates his approach to leadership. He wasn't content with just restoring the status quo. He had a vision for a more stable, efficient, and perhaps more centralized Rome.
But as Goldsworthy points out, not everyone was happy with Caesar's reforms.
Yeah.
Some saw him as a savior, a man who could bring order out of chaos. Others saw him as a threat to the traditional power structures of the Republic, a tyrant in the making.
The book highlights the growing resentment toward Caesar, especially among the senatorial elite who felt their power and influence being diminished.
Right.
They whispered about his ambition, his disregard for tradition, his potential designs on kingship.
This growing unease leads to the formation of the conspiracy against Caesar, culminating in his assassination on the Ides of March. It's a moment that has resonated throughout history, a stark reminder of the fragility of power, even for someone as seemingly invincible as Caesar.
Goldsworthy describes the conspiracy in detail, the key players, their motivations, the meticulous planning that went into the assassination. We see Brutus, Caesar's friend and confidant,
Right.
torn between his loyalty and his belief that Caesar's ambition posed a threat to the Republic. It's a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions, with personal betrayals intertwined with grand political ideals.
So what does it all mean? What is Caesar's legacy?
Right.
Is he a hero, a villain, a tragic figure?
Goldsworthy doesn't offer easy answers. He presents Caesar in all his complexity. A brilliant military strategist, a shrewd politician, a ruthless conqueror, a generous patron, a man driven by ambition, but also, perhaps, a genuine desire to improve the lives of his people.
The book ends not with Caesar's death, but with the aftermath.
Yeah.
The chaos that engulfed Rome as the Republic descended into another round of civil wars, ultimately leading to the rise of the Roman Empire. It's a powerful reminder that even the most dramatic events in history are rarely neat and tidy, and that the consequences of our actions often ripple outward in ways we cannot foresee.
So, dear listener, as we conclude this deep dive into the life of Julius Caesar, we leave you with this.
Okay.
What are your own conclusions about this complex and enigmatic figure? Was he a visionary leader or a ruthless tyrant? Did his actions ultimately benefit or harm Rome? Explore the sources, delve into the debates, and form your own interpretation of this pivotal moment in history.
Thank you for joining us on this fascinating journey. And until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those pages turning.